Okay, so we need to talk about buses, but not the sort I might catch here, and maybe somewhere a bit warmer, a bit drier, and I think I need a coffee. So let's do that first. Okay, so I've retreated somewhere a little warmer, a little drier, and I have coffee. So, the bus. 350 million a week to the NHS, the most famous lie in British political history. Now, 350 million a week works out at roughly £18 billion a year. And it is true, that was our notional bill to the EU. But this is the first lie. I should say, right, I've checked these figures with the 2016 Treasury document. I'll try and put a link to it in a pinned comment. Also, I've rounded all the figures to the nearest £500 million. It just makes it easier to work with. And to be fair, the 350 million was a rounded figure. But so, lie number one, though, is that we gave £18 billion a year to the EU. And therefore, that would be money that would be available to spend on the NHS. The reason it's a lie is because we didn't give £18 billion a year to the EU. We gave £13 billion a year. And the reason is because we got a £5 billion rebate. So that's basically Margaret Thatcher, moaned and whined in the 80s. I think the official justification was something to do with the common agricultural having a larger average size than other farmers were. But basically, we were special. We got a special deal where we got £5 billion off. So that money we weren't giving that money to the EU. We were already spending it on things like defence, education, transport, the NHS. So that means the amount of money we actually gave to the EU was £13 billion a year, which is 250 million a week. So that begs the question, why didn't they just put 250 million on their bus? Because it's still a big figure, and it would have been at least technically truthful. I don't know. Why didn't I don't know. But with that again comes lie number two, because it's a lie to say, really, that we gave 13 billion a year to the EU. And the reason is because 4.5 billion of it came back in grants, basically to farmers and poor areas. And the Vote Leave campaign had already committed to maintaining that level of funding. They made the point that we could spend it in different ways, that we could have different priorities for how we're going to support our farmers, which is a fair point. But they promised the farmers they'd still get the same total sum of money. And they promised the poor areas they'd still get the same total sum of money, which means, by definition then, we can't spend that money on the NHS. So you're now down to our net contribution to the EU budget, which was 8.5 billion, or 160 million a year. So now they could have just written 160 million to the EU, but that still brings us on to what I'd consider to be lie number three. And the reason is because this was presented as if it was some sort of transformative sum. Theresa May at one point in a speech, I can't remember what she was promised, but she said, her line was, when we are no longer giving vast sums of money to the EU. So the implication was that this 8.5 billion was a massive sum of money. Now, it's a big sum of money, but this was a significantly transformative sum of money that would significantly transform the UK budget. Well, this is, I think it's technically from 2015, but this is the pie chart that you used to get sent out, you probably still do in your tax return. I don't know if you can see the sliver, the little tiny blue sliver there. That is the amount of money that we used to give to the EU. And bear in mind, we're only talking about 2/3 of that, because 1/3 of it is already committed to farmers and poor areas. So this is lie number three, that extra sum of money, that 2/3 of that sliver, would somehow have a massively transformative effect on the budget. I do remember there was the awful, like a party political broadcast type thing the Vote Leave campaign did, showing hospitals before and after, where before it was horribly crowded and everyone was waiting, and after it was all nicely lit and no one was waiting, and so on. Because that, apparently that 2/3 of that sliver would deliver that sort of change. I remember the time I was watching my mother-in-law's when it first came on, and I sort of mostly jokingly said afterwards, it was only the fact it wasn't my TV that prevented me from kicking it in. I was so angry. It was a truly disgustingly, misleading broadcast. But that then brings us on to lie number four, which is, well, would we even get that 2/3 of that sliver? Because here's the thing, that's £8.5 billion. Now, watching a video just today where they had Lord David Frost saying that he always accepted that leaving the single market and customs union would have economic penalties. My previous video was about the economic penalties of leaving the single market and the customs union. Now here's the thing, in 2008 when we had the banking crisis, Northern Rock went under, Lehman Brothers went under and all that sort of stuff. What happened was basically loads of people lost their jobs, loads of people lost overtime, lost bonuses. They were earning a lot less. They were paying less income tax, less national insurance. They were buying fewer things, so less VAT. Corporations, some of them went out of business and some had their profit slashed. So a lot less corporation tax. I think less houses being bought, so less stamp duty. And then of course there's that increase in paying out for benefits and so on. The net result of that was the deficit. So the deficit is the gap between what the government spends and what it gets in income, and therefore it has to either borrow that or do some sort of quantitative easing. The deficit went up from something like £15 billion a year to £100 billion a year. It went up by about £85 billion, or about 10 times the money that we'd be getting back. So what that means is, if the economic penalty of Brexit was 10%, a mere tenth of what the impact of that 2008 banking crisis was, it would completely wipe out our 8.5 billion net contribution to the EU budget, and there would be no more money for the NHS. If it was, say, a mere fifth of the impact of the 2008 banking crisis, then in actual fact we'd be 8.5 billion down. We'd have 8.5 billion less to spend on the NHS. And that is line number 4. So line number 3 was to make out this sum of money was way more significant than it was. Line number 4 was to point out that it was all that was all an assumption that Brexit would make no difference. In reality, what it comes down to is, if Brexit had made us economically richer, then we'd have more money to spend on the NHS. If Brexit had made us economically poorer, then we'd have less money to spend on the NHS. Within that context, the 8.5 billion was just a sliver that didn't really make much difference either way. So that was the 4 lies. The first lie, that we give 350 million, we didn't. The second lie would be that we give 250 million, we didn't. The third lie, that we give, whatever that will be, 160 million, we didn't. Or the third lie is that the 160 million is significant in the overall budget, and the fourth lie is that, well, it wouldn't even necessarily be 160 million anyway. It basically depends on whether Brexit's a good idea or not. So you had the entire campaign was based on a completely tiered series of lies, essentially. Their main selling point for Brexit, more money for the NHS, was completely irrelevant. Now, obviously, there's lots of things been going on now. Obviously, there's the pandemic, general sort of overall trade crisis, the war in Ukraine. But clearly, the NHS has not got more money in it. And I think, in a sense, it's relevant. The campaign's already lost. But I think the point is, 2016 marked an era of post-truth politics. It was a campaign fought pretty much entirely on a tiered series of lies and misdirections and deceptions. It was their main slogan. I'm not libeling them now. They can't say, oh, that wasn't what we fought on. It was the main slogan you wrote on your bus. It was the main thing you fought on. It started us down an era of post-truth politics where it doesn't matter. Politicians always exaggerated. They're always a bit like car salesmen. But this is the difference between like a car salesman and an actual fraudster. And I think that's significant. And I think it's worth, people fixated so much on the first lie, 350. I think it's worth looking that there was other series of lies, misdirections behind that. So yeah, there we go. How to win a campaign, blah, blah, on a bus.